I had confirmation as I was coming here that Portsmouth City Council are going to debate selective licensing next Tuesday.
Could I ask Mr. Martin Sillam to make your deputation on item 11C? You have 6 minutes.
Councillors, I agree with most of what the two ladies behind me have said. The one thing I disagree on is that selective licensing will address any of those problems. As chair of the Local Landlords Association, let me start somewhere else. As chair of the Local Landlords Association, I understand what you guys see when you are standing on the doorsteps. I know how often it is for you, because I see it too. You're stood on a doorstep and you see a tenant with a particular issue with their tenancy, a problem with their house, and you probably go home wondering why you can't help, wishing you could do more. Actually, there is a lot you can do, but selective licensing isn't part of it. It won't help. If you vote for selective licensing, what you are doing is delaying action for at least a year, because it will be that long before it comes in, and I would recommend, or I would estimate it's more likely 18, 24 months. And you're committing PCC to inspect the 25,000 good properties in the city in the hope of finding the few that need work, when most of you can find the few that need work because you're on the doorsteps and you're seeing them. So I think selective licensing is just a big delay that you can avoid. The motion states that a key factor is a lack of rights for renters. This is just not true. There are 150 laws, 450 regulations already in place to control the private sector. In the past year, we've had the Tenants' Fees Ban, the Fitness for Human Habitation Act, and the Homelessness Reduction Act. All of these over time will greatly improve the lot of tenants. What is lacking is education and support for tenants to ensure they understand their rights and what they need to do in order to get the level of standard and tenancy that they deserve. Selective licensing will not achieve this. The motion mentions a failure of local authorities to enforce. That's one part of Cal's motion I completely agree with. Enforcement is the crucial issue. You can have as many rules as you like, but if you don't enforce, they're a total waste of time. The motion also cites Newham as an example. Please be very careful when using Newham as an example. 54% of residents there were not born in the UK. Only 1 in 6 class themselves as white British. This is not a racist statement, this is demographic analysis. 2 out of 5 do not speak English as their main language. 1 in 6 don't speak English at all. And against that background, 71% of properties are rented, which is double the Portsmouth number. And Newham ranks number 1 in the country for its proportion of 5-person households. It ranks number 1 in the country for its proportion of 6-person households. It also, for the number of 7 and 8 or more person households, ranks number 1. Okay, so what? The average property in Newham has 2.4 bedrooms. So do the math. Newham is grossly overcrowded with people least connected to the British system to be able to sort out their own problems. And I would argue that Newham let it get into a hell of a mess before they brought in licensing. And although in 2016 more than half of the prosecutions against landlords in the country were brought by Newham, that was a result of the enforcement that Newham took rather than the licensing or any other tool that they used. It was an enforcement action Another point, selective licensing is not necessarily self-financing. Yes, you can charge the landlords for the cost of administering the service, but we'd argue that you can't recover the cost of enforcement, and enforcement is key. Further point on enforcement, I believe Portsmouth already has the largest enforcement team of any council on the South Coast. By South Coast, I go up as far as Reading. So why have they not been more successful? It's not for lack of licensing. We've had 5 years of additional licensing, and we still hear of the problems that are out there. 2 reasons, in my view. Administering HMO licensing for 3,000 properties in the city takes a lot of time and effort that could have been better spent focusing on the problem properties. The other reason we've been less successful is because with the licensing in place, it was very easy for some of our council officers to focus on student properties, go for the easy wins, and as a result, make themselves look good, whilst ignoring the problem properties where the most vulnerable live, because that would create problems for housing options and all the other departments that get involved with homelessness. The pdpla are happy to run education for any councillor. We have an expert legal educator to help explain how you can, next time you're on a doorstep, take advantage of what's out there already and use the enforcement team you already have and solve the problems. No need to wait a year for licensing. It can be done and we can help you get there. The pdpla believes that selective licensing will not improve conditions for tenants in this city, but a greater focus on enforcement at the bottom end of the market, where the most vulnerable live, to protect and enhance their lives, will do so. I urge you to reject this motion and instead to ask for better enforcement of existing rules. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Sillam. Can I ask Mr. Alwyn Oliver to make your deputation in respect of 11C?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. My name is Alwyn Oliver. I'm Vice Chairman of Portsmouth District Landlords Association. I'm also a landlord and have been for 25 years, a letting agent for 5. I'm accredited as a landlord and a letting agent by Portsmouth City Council and the Association of Residential Letting Agents, and I hold a technical award from that body. I oppose selective licensing, but would like to speak in favour of the case for reform. In fact, I consider reform to be long overdue at both local and national level. Portsmouth has a very important part to play. In some respects, is uniquely placed because of its enforcement team and because of the work done by Housing Options in gathering data. But selective licensing is not the answer. It is like taking a sledgehammer to miss a nut you're aiming to crack. I'm fully with the two previous speakers, Ms Coles and Ms Miller, but I just don't see how licensing will help. I should say I live in Southsea and most of my properties are within 3 miles of where I live. I do own one overseas property, Gosport. And I should like to mention as well, I'm a lifelong Labour Party supporter, former party member and activist, and I've also worked as a trade unionist and within my local Citizens Advice Bureau, where I was a specialist employment law advisor. I'm not to the right of the political spectrum by any means, and I hold absolutely no candle for those who exploit tenants with poor housing, or indeed tenants who exploit landlords through persistent rent arrears, damage or antisocial behaviour, and I do support the need for better landlord education. I'm generally against introducing legislation that would penalise otherwise law-abiding businesses and citizens, including landlords, unless there is an overriding social policy gain. Here I don't see it. As I understand it, enforcement can't be paid that is enforcement of standards by licensing. I understand there's some authority in Hemmings and Westminster that says enforcement of the payment for the scheme and payment for enforcement of the scheme, that is to make sure you're a member, can be paid for. But as I understand it, the enforcement role on housing health and safety rating cannot be paid for that. And some of these cases are up for appeal in the Supreme Court anyway. So I'm not sure it's the fundraiser to solve the problem that it would like to be. There are some good ideas in the motion, and there are good ideas being floated around. I've seen some of the Councillor Corkery's posts on social media, including recommending referencing. I'm very in favour of referencing tenants. However, for this to be a licence requirement, there would need to be an objective standard. Is me, an agent, phoning you, another landlord, adequate, or should I go through some formal process? Is the service provided by one of my referencing agencies costing £5 equally as good value to a landlord or a community as a service provided by FCC Paragon, one of our local companies, for £35? Is there going to be, if there's going to be referencing, what objective standard could you use? It's more complicated than it looks, but it's a desirable outcome. As a matter of social policy, by the way, I want you to think about what happens to tenants who could not pass referencing and who would need provision under the Homelessness Reduction Act, which is an obligation on the City Council. I think it's a blind alley for this reason, because I think it will leave too many tenants disenfranchised when the problem has already developed to an unmanageable stage. Remember as well that tenants who harm their communities also harm their landlords by and large, often by damaging properties and running up rent arrears and hanging on till the last minute. Councillor Corkery is right, and this motion is right, to wish to address the problem of antisocial behaviour, whether it's the much-loathed bin bags or other noise or other antisocial behaviour problems. But selective licensing won't help, however well-meaning. The motion states, our own council statistics show that the single highest cause of homelessness will be the ending of a private sector tenancy. What a shame that problems only get dealt with by ending tenancies. However, it fails to recognise that nearly in every case where Section 21 is used as a workaround to get round problems with rent arrears and other problems. The removal of Section 21, incidentally proposed by national legislatures, all but eviscerates landlords' potential to deal with antisocial behaviour. And in 25 years as a landlord, agent and advisor I'm one of the main legal affairs advisors for pdpla, I have never seen a case where antisocial behaviour has been the sole ground for ending a tenancy. Education for landlords could be offered in the way that drivers who speed are offered education as an alternative for a penalty. The current legislation around possession is not fit for 21st century, and I think it could be done better. Wider reform is already proposed on Section 21, as I've said. We as a Landlords Association have made detailed proposals for an alternative specialist housing court, which I think would address problems if tenants and neighbours had access to that court. Finally, and there are things, we think the example of the Canada court model provides a much better approach to dealing with issues between landlords and tenants, including issues of disrepair. I think that's me, is it? Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you.
Thank you, Ms. Orr.